Hey there, and welcome back to MTG Another Look. And if you're new here, welcome and thank you for clicking. MTG Another Look is a channel where we talk about underutilized or otherwise interesting cards for Commander. We also discuss previews, reprints, and sometimes do pack openings, just for a little treat. If you end up enjoying the video, give it a like and subscribe to really help out the channel. Thanks a lot, everyone. Now let's take another look and get into it. What if there was a green quick study? Let me just start with a disclaimer. Custom cards can sometimes be a bit pointless to discuss, and trust me, that's not what this is. This theoretical card is only to shine light on a recently printed card as a comparison. But what do you think? If green had an instant that drew you 2 cards, would it be a powerful card? Green's card draw is pretty good at this point, with cards like Toski, Bearer of Secrets, or cards that draw when creatures enter, like Guardian Project, and the other cards like it. There's also cards like Return of the Wildspeaker that draw cards based off of a creature's power. These cards have propelled green from a pretty poorly powerful color about a decade ago into probably the second or third best color at drawing cards. All of the aforementioned cards depend on creatures to draw. When you don't have a creature to play or creatures on the battlefield, they kind of do nothing. Green doesn't have too many methods of drawing cards independent of creatures. There are cantrips that still come on creatures a lot of the time, like with Elvish Visionary. But besides that, there's Harmonize, Sylvan Library, and not too much else. On an empty board with no creatures in hand, Harmonize and Sylvan Library are a couple of the only cards with green color pips that can draw you cards and put you up cards in hand. Harmonize was a color-shifted version of Concentrate, and Sylvan Library was a card printed so long ago that the color pie wasn't so fleshed out yet. Even nowadays, without niche things like Monarch, Investigate, or Enchantress playstyles, there is no whole lot of generic card advantage. In Outlaws of Thunder Junction, we just got the closest thing to a green draw 2 we have yet. I'm talking about Smuggler Surprise. I'm sure you've heard a good amount of discourse about it so far, but I bet almost none of it is about the first mode. Let's look at it. Let's pretend the card is nothing but the first mode. It would be an instant that costs 2 and a green, and has you mill 4 cards, and put 2 lands and or creatures milled this way into your hand. The card will almost always put 2 cards from the top of your deck into your hand. It lets you put 2 creatures, 2 lands, or 1 of each in your hand. In a deck that has a decent number of creatures, you're likely to get 2 creature hits or a hit and a land every time. Even if you hit 2 lands only, it still wouldn't be much worse than a quick study. Getting 2 physical cards in your hand is very valuable, even if they're both lands. But this card does let you dig 4 cards in your deck instead of just 2. You mill 4, then get to choose 2 out of them to put in your hand. The other 2 cards stay in your graveyard, which is like a second hand in a lot of decks. Some cards you'd prefer to have in your graveyard, like a creature or other big permanent you plan on reanimating, or putting a card with Unearth or Flashback in your graveyard. In decks that can utilize the graveyard even a little bit, it kind of gives you access to 4 cards for 3 mana. This kind of effect isn't new in green, and especially Golgari, but what is new is choosing 2 cards from the milled cards and putting them into your hand. Satyr Wayfinder and Grizzly Salvage are both cards that have seen plenty of play, but each only put 1 card in your hand. They only cantrip. Smuggler Surprise gives you 2 in hand. It's the difference between Impulse and Quick Study. I'd like to see more effects like this in green, and in 2 color combos with green in it. It's a way of diversifying green's card draw beyond play creature, draw card. It's a way of putting green's card draw on instants and sorceries while still fitting its color pie. I think this card is good enough to play in a whole lot of green decks, even if it was just the first mode. It's good enough to fit in one of the card draw slots in a large number of 1, 2, and, depending on the colors, 3 color commander decks. I personally would include it as one of the card draw spells and use it proactively to keep the deck humming along. If you have held up mana or a struggling early game, fire it off as card draw and a turn. Find your land drops on time. Make your deck as consistent as it can be. And if it's a late game and you don't need extra cards, use the more exciting mode of putting creatures into play. Or if you happen to be getting board wiped, use the heroic intervention mode. But mainly, think of it as an instant speed card draw that can be surprise beaters or protection if the situation comes up. Smuggler Surprise is obviously good in stompy decks. I see most of the decks that have adopted it are decks that are using it mostly to try to cheat out big creatures. because that's the flashy mode that gets people excited. But I think it belongs in a lot more decks beyond just Stompy. Any decks that play a mix of creatures and other spells could use it, whether they're tribal decks or even just a pile of good stuff. Those decks are going to be playing creatures and lands to put in your hand with the first mode. Even green Spellslinger decks play plenty of creatures. In Wart the Raid Mother, you'll see Goblin and Narcomancers and Young Pyromancers. There will be other token makers too, especially when people lean into a Goblin theme to have creatures to copy spells with. Calamax the Stormsire has 4 power, so it can make use of the protection mode. It can copy the Smuggler's Surprise to draw cards, and can even cheat out some of your utility creatures or a Jin Gataxia's Progress Tyrant. Even decks on the opposite side of the spectrum from Stompy decks have plenty of good use cases for Smuggler's Surprise. And remember, don't let it gum up your hand trying to wait for a chance to use the mode that cheats creatures into play. That chance may never come. Think of it as card draw and fire it off when you have a chance, and if the opportunity comes up to use the other modes, then use it that way. Okay, a second topic I have for today is Braid of Fire. There are a lot of people building Obeka Splitter of Seconds decks right now. And when you read Braid of Fire, which makes great use of extra upkeeps and gives you an increasing amount of mana each time, it seems like a shoo-in, right? But it's not. As of time of writing, EDH Rec says 20% of Obeka decks have Braid of Fire in it, and when you look over the other cards that people are playing in the deck, it's kind of hard not to determine that it's a bad decision. Braid of Fire is an amazing card that can provide you absurd amounts of extra mana, but your deck needs to be built around it effectively. What are you going to do with the extra mana? Let's say Obeka gives you 2 extra upkeeps and you have Braid of Fire on board. The first upkeep, it adds a mana, then the mana goes away when you move to your next upkeep. Then it triggers again and you get 2 mana, and you have to use that 2 mana right then because it's going to go away when that upkeep ends. Whenever you switch phases, your mana pool empties. You could get to a point where Braid of Fire makes 5 mana, then the mana disappears, then makes 6 mana and it disappears, and so on. The only way for the mana to be useful is to use it at instant speed. That means casting instant spells or activating abilities of permanence on board. If you're in an Obeka deck, so far most of the things I see people playing with it are permanents that have beneficial upkeep effects. And how many of those have abilities that you can sink your mana into? Exceedingly few. Going over the cards that might see play in an Obeka deck, I see Tamio's Journal, which makes clue tokens each upkeep, and the mana can be used to sack the clues for cards. Okay, that kinda works, but what else? There's Theater of Horrors, which is a mana sink that's expensive. You can use the mana in increments of 4 to deal 1 damage. Hopefully you don't have 3 or 6 age counters on Braid of Fire, because you're going to be wasting a lot of mana you can't use. There's also Joyra of the Gidu, which can suspend cards at instant speed for 2 mana apiece. That's actually not bad. The suspend fits the extra upkeeps theme, and it's a good way to sink your mana at instant speed. And after that is when we hit a wall pretty hard. There are almost no cards with beneficial upkeep effects that have abilities you can sink mana into repeatedly. Some people have been playing Aggravated Assault in Obeka decks, which sounds like a decent idea. And you might think, hey, that's perfect. Once you hit 5 age counters, you can make infinite combats with Braid of Fire mana, right? Nope. Unfortunately, Aggravated Assault's ability can only be used as a sorcery. You can't use mana that only exists during an upkeep step on sorcery speed abilities. Now, there are good mana sinks to play with Braid of Fire, but none of them really fit in an Obeka deck. And the more cards you try to put into your deck list to accommodate Braid of Fire, a single card, the more you are taking away from the strength and theme of your deck. You would be building your deck in 2 different directions, with no guarantee that you'll even draw the Braid of Fire. Without 10 or so natural cards that are mana sinks, and that also fit the main theme of the deck, upkeep effects, it's probably best just to cut Braid of Fire. Which is unfortunate, because it's a fun and powerful card, but it just doesn't do hardly anything for this deck. If any of you come up with a good way to use it, or a good amount of mana sinks that would fit in an Obeka deck without hurting the theme and strength of the deck too much, let me know. Thank you for watching, everybody. What do you think about the cards we discussed today? Are these cards diamonds in the rough, or just more rough? Are there any cards you think are hidden gems? Let me know in the comments down below, and give the video a like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. I will see you next time, and have a great rest of your day.